How culture affects the development of language competence. Introduction. Language and culture are inextricably linked. The idea that languages are embedded in culture and are born in culture speaks to the vitality of culture. If language reflects culture, then being competent in a second language would also require one to be competent and comfortable in the culture representing the second language. The idea that culture cannot be broken down into a list of items to be learned to become competent in a second culture is what undergirds the notion that cultures represent varying ways of viewing the world. Current trends in culture and language education give culture a more prominent role. However, the question of how culture is treated needs to be explored further. This essay weaves together the varying ways that culture and language have been linked and discusses some complications due to a misunderstanding of cultural codes. What are the issues in culture and language? The concept of culture is, to say the least, widely construed, ranging in import from litanies of folkloric traits to concepts of underlying principles that account for surface traits, to the possibilities for a universal culture, the characteristics of which are analogous to universal grammar in many ways. Inglis defined culture as being the study of enacted values as each assumes its place in the narrative of the day. This leads to the idea that being competent in a second language, SA, would require one to be able to adopt the perspectives of the second culture, SC. The general theme of those who believe that culture is a set of perspectives is the notion that people's histories, experiences, behaviors, traditions, languages, and beliefs are reflected in their respective cultures. Importance of this issue. A definition of culture is important as a matter of first importance in attributing our role to culture in second language acquisition, SLA. If culture does have a role to play, what aspects of the spectrum of definitions of culture apply? Before the investigation can proceed, definitions have to be settled on. Too much of the literature on pedagogical culture, for example, advocates an explicit teaching of culture without defining just what the culture to be taught is. What is meant by a cultural context for SLA? Given an operational understanding of culture, what is there about it that can be said to influence SLA? If the target language, TL, is learned in a target culture, TC, context, SLA as opposed to FLA, what impact does that context have on the learner? Is the TC context an unfavorable or a favorable environment for SLA? Alternatively, is the learner's perception of themselves in the TC a variable different from that of either TC or NC? Cultural factors on SLA. Factors of cultural influence on SLA need to be specified. It is neither logically nor theoretically sufficient to posit simply that the TC influences SLA and leave things at that. What is needed is, 1. A specification of what aspects of culture influence SLL and, 2. An understanding of what the nature of that influence is. Further, the difference between cultural context and a linguistic influence of culture in SLA is, heretofore, unspecified. Is the influence of culture contextual only? Is there a linguistic connection? Is TL performance a function of one competence or two? Attempts to answer these questions and still other questions prompted by them have fallen short. Schumann's acculturation model, for example, suggests that SLA and acculturation operate in tandem and that an interlingual pigeonization parallels the acculturation process. For Schumann, SLA is a function of SCA. Unfortunately, it is not always clear what the connections between these processes are. Schumann even goes so far as to suggest a neurological basis for these operations but stops short of precise specification of what the influences of acculturation and pigeonization on each other may be, even if a neurological locus for the acculturation and language acquisition process as Schumann describes it could be authenticated. The acculturation model appears not to be falsifiable and is thus not provable. Moreover, data analyzed by researchers undermine the acculturation model by demonstrating that residing in the TC, even as a consequence of the length of residence, does not, as Schumann suggests, in and of itself promote SLA. SLA does not equate with SCA. That is, if language competence can be specified as actual competence, not merely performance strategies, the extent to which culture is implicated in that competence needs to be described and documented in the actual performance of learners. Conclusion. This essay supports the role of culture in the development of language competence, contributing to the latter as a processing universal. Otherwise, a cursory understanding of the SC being studied in conjunction with the SL will serve to reinforce the culture-bound notions that second culture learners hold. There is widespread, but for the most part non-systematic interest in the role of culture in SLA. The essay consolidates different, and occasionally disparate, views into a codified account of the role of culture in SLA. Thus, an understanding of the culture and language of these perspectives needs to be gained.